Hey, there has been conflicting information, some quite recently, about what I did or did not do in Doom Episode 1. So let's straighten this out. Now, I am on record, and I stand by my statement that I worked on 20 of Doom's 27 levels. But how can that be, Sandy, you ask? John Romero did all 9 of the first episode, and Tom Hall did 8 of the remaining ones, did he not? Well, yes, he did, but bear with me. Tom's levels were fine, but the game was not very far along when he did them. Tom didn't have access to all the textures to put on his surfaces. He didn't have all the enemies. He didn't have all the weapons. He didn't have Lost Souls. He didn't have the BFG. He didn't have the decorations and trigger scripts we got later. He didn't even have skyboxes, as I recall. So when he left at the end of the summer of 93, I took over his levels, which were incomplete, not through any fault of Tom's, but because there wasn't enough, he couldn't complete them, right? And I had to add material to them. This wasn't his fault. I'm sure if he'd stayed at id, he would have handled the job. But as things stood, it was my responsibility. His levels took nearly as much time as my own to create from start to finish. So I added areas to them, I populated them, I did all this stuff. Now, Tom was actually in the game, Doom, from the earliest stages. For a while, apparently, when they only had a single texture or so to deal with, he made entire levels out of just that one shiny metal texture that's now used in, door jams. The other guys at id got so sick of that shiny metal that they got it into their head that metal was a bad texture and should never be used. So then I would use it for, a piece of trim or inside a slot, and they'd berate me. Why are you using that metal, they'd say. I'd say, it's an accent, not a theme. The fans won't be sick of it like you are. But that's more a matter of everyone gets blinders when you're working on a project for a long time. So if you're curious about what a pure Tom Hall level might look at in Doom, probably the closest you can get from the early days would be E2M2, the warehouse level, E3M5, the teleporter cathedral, and E2M7, which is kind of a mishmash, but it has some of Tom's early lighting experiments. Now, I did lots of stuff on these two as well. There was less structural changes than some of Tom's other levels, so that's where to look to see what Doom could have been if Tom had been there instead of me. Oh yeah, and if you are curious about me, check out E2M6, The Halls of the Damned. That's the very first level I did, and I did it starting with the beginning, so the opening section and then the part with the acid that raises and falls and all that. That's the very first thing I did that got me my job at id, and then I just used that level and expanded it and finished it. So that's my first level. Anyway, because I did so much work on Tom's levels, spent weeks on them, I populated them, I added districts and neighborhoods, I naturally feel a little bit proprietary about them. Sure, they're Tom's creations, but they're also mine. Now, moving along, John Romero is on record that the idea all along was that he would create Doom's first episode, and I would create both of the other episodes. I'm sure John is correct, but you must understand that I wasn't told this at the time. See, id Software was supernaturally bad at communication, so I had no idea that was the plan. All I knew is that I was supposed to get as many levels done as I could, and that John Romero would be doing some of the levels. Now, naturally, John wouldn't be doing as many as me because he had other tasks, like creating DoomEd, the program we used to create and make the levels. John and I spent a lot of time consulting what triggers, what effects we wanted. Every time I thought of a new effect I wanted on the map, I'd go to Romero and ask for it, and he'd program it in. Usually I'd have access to it by the next day. Sometimes the same day. He was really responsive. And of course, we all play tested all the levels, so John would come to me with an idea for one of my levels, or I would find a problem in one of his levels and he'd fix it, right? Everybody had an oar in everyone else's work. I'm not saying that means that he designed my levels or I designed his, but we all influence each other. Now, this sadly ended during the latter part of Quake. When we started just working on our own levels, we didn't talk to each other anymore. I mean, I still played American McGee's levels and he played mine, but John Romero, I think, was already starting to see the rot set in at id's culture. I think he was looking to leave, so he spent a lot of time by himself. I'm sure he was a bit down about it. I mean, I would have been, but that was later. In Doom 1, we were all buddies, helped each other like a team should. Anyway, since I didn't know and hadn't been told I was supposed to keep my hands off the first episode, I didn't. I checked it over for holes, and I came across the incomplete version of E1M4 Command Control. Now, this was one of Tom Hall's levels originally. So, since I'd been completing all of Tom's other levels, I went in and I fixed up E1M4 as well. I added sections, I populated it, and so forth, like I'd done with his other levels. Later on, John Romero took over E1M4 from me and added more touches. So the Doom Wiki now says that E1M4 was a Tom Hall level that was finished by John Romero, and that is perfectly true, but I was there in the middle. In fact, I can point to parts of the map that I did. Let me give you a single example. If you look at the map, you see in the upper left, there's a structure that from the top down looks a lot like a swastika, except not quite. Let me just say that at one time, it was a swastika. Not because anyone at id was a Nazi or, I guess, a Buddhist, but because when it was built, they weren't thinking. So I fixed it. There's other parts that I did. Anyway, since I populated and added stuff to E1M4, just as I did with Tom's other levels, I feel okay kind of classifying it as one of mine, at least in part, even though John Romero went over it again at the end and improved it further. Then there's E1M8, the boss fight. Now this one I began and wasn't able to figure out how to get a WoW finish. So I showed it to John Romero and he said he would take it over and do it from there. And he did. The whole boss fight with the Bruiser Brothers at the end was all him. I don't know if they're called the Bruiser Brothers outside of id Software though, the two Hell Barons. That's what we called them internally. Anyway, but again, there's still things I did. So if you played the boss fight, remember the very start of the level, there's this elevator that goes down and there's exploding barrels with a bunch of demons, and you have to shoot the barrels to blow them up while the elevator's going down. And if you time it right, the elevators will kill all the demons. If you don't, then the demons will swarm you and they'll get you. That was my creation. I liked it so much that it eventually led to level 23 in Doom 2, the Barrels of Fun. So if you hate Barrels of Fun, kind of Doom E1M8 was my fault. I also wrote the text at the end of Doom E1M8. This glorious prose is 100% mine. Anyway, I spent enough time on the boss fight, I felt it was partly mine. I'm willing to give John the majority of the credit, but I was in there a little bit. Finally, Doom Episode 1, Level 1. Now, as I'd been looking over all the levels of the game as I'm trying to do my job, I noticed that the very first level of the game didn't exist. We had all these other levels, not the first level. Where's the introductory level? So naturally, I built one. Now, it turns out that there was no level 1 for a reason. The two Johns had decided not to build level 1 until quite late in the project, because that way they would have all the cool bells and whistles that they were developing, and by that time they'd have skyboxes and acid baths and all the textures and decorations, and so they could make a really kick-butt level 1. Now, this makes sense, of course. You'd want to have really cool looking 3D in the first level. That's why that first level has the skyboxes, the open areas. It has lots of verticality, the stairs you go up, demons on a thing shooting their fireballs down at you at an angle. But again, nobody had told me that that's why they didn't have level 1. I guess I should have figured it out on my own, but I didn't. In my defense, I was trying to finish every single level in episodes 2 and 3 in just 3 months, plus my other tasks. I was working like a fiend. I didn't have bandwidth to think logically about project management. During this time, I do remember John Carmack coming in once and getting mad because I left at like 8 or 9 o'clock. "Why is Sandy leaving so early?" he said. Please note that John usually came into the office about 2 or 3 o'clock, then stayed till after midnight. So John was told that I came in usually at like 7 or 8 a.m., so I was putting in 12 or more hours. He just wasn't there to see it. Well, no one was, because only me and the receptionist were there when I'd come in. Of course, as always, when John realized he was wrong about something, he manned up and admitted it. Anyway, I did a level 1 because there wasn't one, and I didn't know it had purposely been left out. When I showed it to John Romero, he said he'd make a full new one, and he did. My level was scrapped completely, and good riddance. John's level was terrific. Now, for those who want to know what it was like, I did not try to reuse any parts of that level in anything else I did. I'm sure it is completely lost. The computer that files were on, I'm sure, was scrapped long ago. Anyway, I hope that clarifies what I did or did not do in the first version of Doom. So I'm the author of 20, 18, or 10 levels, depending on how you count it. Oh, and please subscribe, like us, and if you want notifications, you know how to get them. I don't have a Patreon, but I do have a website where you can buy my stuff. Check it out.